This is the BioCentury Show.
Brought to you by the 26th BioEquity Europe, scheduled for May 2025 in Prague. Join BioCentury, EBD Group, and regional hosts IOCB Tech and Prague Bio at Biotech's premier CEO and investor conference, and debate what comes next for European biotech.
Hello, welcome to the BioCentury Show. I'm Selena Koch, executive editor at BioCentury. I'm delighted to be joined today by Najat Khan, CEO and president of Recursion Pharmaceuticals. So Recursion, as you all probably know, is one of the most closely watched companies in the Techbio space and probably one of the clearest public test cases whether AI can really change how drugs are discovered and developed. Najat recently stepped into the CEO position late last year after serving as Chief R&D Officer. Before that, she was in senior leadership roles at Johnson & Johnson Innovative Medicine, including Chief Data Science Officer and Global Head of Strategy, Portfolio, and Operations for R&D. So from that mix of titles, I think it should be clear that Najat's worked at the intersection of science, of AI, of portfolio strategy, and that gives her, I think, a particularly useful vantage point for this moment in the industry, when the question no longer seems to be, does AI have real potential? It's more like, how and when is it going to demonstrate repeatedly that it's generating, better drug candidates, better decisions, and outcomes for patients. So I think that's a good place to start because Recursion has spent over a decade building its platform. And now you seem to be moving into, a new era when you're more focused on, generating those clinical proof points. But when you look across the broader tech biofield, do you think that that's starting to change more broadly? Like, are the younger companies going to be held to a different standard where you have to kind of prove what your platform can translate kind of faster? Or do you think the field's not there yet?
I think the broader, it's a great question and great to be here. Thank you so much for having me. Look, I think it's been over a decade of investment in the AI, biotech, tech, biopharma space. And it had started with a lot of, let's just face it, hype. And if you believe in that hype too much, it inevitably leads to disappointment. And I think I've watched that as I've been at J&J and then eventually moved here, sort of that evolution happen. So I do think that the bar and the standard is evolving for the good, which is really around what is the end game? The end game is to make differentiated medicines that matter. And so then the bar has to be, no matter what data set you have, what model you have, what approaches you're using, ultimately it's around, can you actually have better data, whether it's in the clinic or preclinical? And then also, can you do this better, faster? Having said all of that, I think there's still a duality across private and public companies. I think for public companies such as Recursion and some others, the focus is really on those proof points, going from platform to promise to proof points, while at the same time keeping your platform at the bleeding edge. Because if anything, I can tell you, I've worked across a lot of modalities. AI is one of the fastest moving modalities you'll ever see. So you can't ever be fast enough in terms of the evolution and the technological investments. I think some of the private companies that you have coming up, I think they're still, they're still being valued a lot by the promise, Selena. So it's kind of maybe where Recursion was 5 years ago, which is around, is there a better model that you have? Is it a larger number of parameters? And so forth. But even there, you're starting to see more of a focus on not just, can you do what others can do now, but can you do things more out of domain, as I like to call it, different protein classes where there isn't much data, more novelty and so forth. So definitely see that evolution. But I think for some of the early stage companies, it's still around the data and the model building versus for a Recursion, is the proof points driven by a platform that is proprietary data, models, and quite frankly, the integration of a platform that's needed to make better drugs. It's not enough to be better in just biology, chemistry, or the clinic. You have to use AI across the entire vertical tech stack.
Yeah, well, that can segue, I think, into the next thing I wanted you to help us get some clarity on. which is where AI is adding the most value today and where you get a real benefit from that stringing together of different parts of the ecosystem. So when I look at Recursion's clinical pipeline, right, the clearest direct role of AI is not the same for every program, or at least it seems to me. Some cases, like in FAP, it's more tied to prioritizing the right biology. In other cases, it seems like it's more connected to the molecule design or optimization. So do you think of these as different kinds of proof points for parts of the platform? And then is there an example that you would point out where you're really seeing value in that stringing together of the multiple capabilities?
Yeah, I'm so glad you noticed that. And I think maybe just the philosophy, big picture is, again, it's about driving differentiation using our platform in areas that would make a drug a really good drug, a really differentiated drug, right? Sometimes that can be from a biology perspective, sometimes that's chemistry, and sometimes, quite frankly, it's how you do clinical development. So it's not about it's not that you have to use every single component of the platform for the sake of using it. It's which part of the platform can unlock the most value from making a better drug. So it's kind of the flip of that question. So as you mentioned, look, from a biology perspective, novel targets, novel biology is incredibly important. But quite frankly, it's also what's going to be causal. That's where we do a lot of work. We have about 40 petabytes of proprietary data. The company started in the phenomic space, which is high content cell imaging, like really looking at the morphology of the cells. But we added to that more omics, transcriptomics, and then also added more patient data. Why is that important? We want targets that are not just interesting and insightful, but causal to disease. And in that, you mentioned the FAP program 4881, that is one of the earliest examples of insights from the biology part of our platform, where essentially we were able to find a unique mechanism times indication insight that nobody had tested before clinically, which is FAP and an allosteric MEK1/2 inhibitor. Now, behind that, there are many more programs that we have in discovery, late discovery, which are novel targets, which are getting ready to get into the clinic. In addition to that, there's a second category of programs, as you mentioned. I call them the unconquered targets, where what you really need to do is improve the therapeutic index. And that's where we use our design platform. So to just give you an example, our design platform has everything from generative AI, physics-based approaches, multi-parameter optimization using machine learning, but also these models are synthetically aware. We want to make sure the molecules you're making are not inconsistent with or not just inconsistent, but are challenging from a CMC perspective down the road. Why do we do that? We call them synthetically aware because we want to ensure that these molecules can actually be developed in an appropriate way to be a drug. That's very unique. The other thing that's unique is we synthesize about 90% less compounds than industry, and we get to these molecules to advanced candidate in half the time. So on average, across our portfolio, where we have over 15 discovery programs, we synthesize about 330 compounds versus 2,500 plus for industry. And we do that in 17 months to get to advanced candidate versus 42 months for industry. I call these my green shoots. This is a inkling that, look, we are doing things differently. We're simulating more, making less. That's exactly where industries go when they get better and better at predicting. You predict more, you make less. So we have 3-4 programs in our clinic, Selena, that use that philosophy. Where essentially we know what are the safety challenges, and we've used our models to try to design that out, and we're testing it in the clinic. I think
So I love, if you don't mind, I love examples like that where you can just get into the number of compounds synthesized was reduced this much, time to clinic that much, et cetera, because it makes it all very concrete, like what the value is, what is exactly the efficiency. But it also makes me wonder, like when we step back and look at, okay, where is AI making the most difference today? Is it just easier to quantify the value in the chemistry domain versus in biology? Because with biology, you kind of don't really know until much later, right? And then if you don't get that signal you're looking for in phase 2 proof of concept, it's not always clear if there was something about the biology or the molecule or something else. So when you're building that confidence sort of early on the biology side, like what are you looking for there?
What we generally tend to look for is the quality of the data we're generating. Because remember, biology is more of I would call it a data challenge, versus chemistry is more of a multi-parameter, small molecule chemistry, multi-parameter optimization problem. So we look at the high quality data we can generate and the kind of at scale, novel insights and associations we can find. We can find hundreds of these associations. That's the top of your funnel. Then we measure it by what amount of those associations or insights can you functionally validate? Can you do that translation to say, these are novel targets we have deep conviction in? So, we have a really, we are so grateful to our partners at Roche Genentech. I mean, in the neuroscience space and GI Onc, we have a partnership with them. We have created about 6 maps, these cell atlases and so forth. And a couple of them, I'll give you just one example. One is we developed 1 trillion iPSC-derived neuronal cells. That's a lot. We're the largest producer of it we've done it in our Salt Lake City labs where I am today. And we did a whole genome knockout and overexpression. Why am I telling you all this? Because we do all the wet lab. Then we build the models on top of it, the foundation models. And from there, we are drawing insights on what could be novel targets. And the team, I just had in a meeting, all hands on deck. How do I measure it? Are we getting really novel targets that are validated, at least the translational validation, that we have conviction in to be new programs? That's quite exciting. And that's not hundreds of programs. You're looking, if you think about it in neuroscience, there's 40, 50, 60 targets and everybody's going after, Selena.
Yes.
How do you expand biology to new areas? That is a big question, right? And so to me, it's even if you get 4 or 5, that is, novel programs, novel areas to pursue. That's huge. And then when you compound that with, can you design molecules for them better, faster? That's another compounding factor. And then in addition to that, can we use our AI approaches in clinical development to pick the right patients to increase signal to noise? So I don't have like a one stat for you, but what I watch is the level of novelty. And I'll say from some of these atlases that we have, about 80 to 90% of what we're finding is novel. And then the other 20% is biology that's known. That's really exciting because Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, ALS, these are, you talk about unmet need. 2 decades and there's nothing, especially in Parkinson's, that's really moved forward. If you could even, find novel targets in that space and you can find novel biology, but you can validate known biology, that's an incredibly important start. And sorry, I just want to say one thing before I forget. The way normally drug discovery is done is not lab in a loop. That's how we do it. We have our wet and dry lab, and we're constantly learning from that. But once you create the data set, Selena, it turns into a search problem. You're querying that same data set over and over and over again. So the other thing I look for is the foundation of data that you built that can amplify the impact you can have. And that is not a one-off experiment. So I think that's also another.
That pays rewards over time. Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah. But before we have to go to a break, which we'll have to soon, I want to get to the third leg of the platform because clinical trial design, decision-making, it feels like the least mature use case for AI right now. So what should we be looking for there to gauge, where and to what extent it's making an impact?
Yeah, I would say, look, the areas I would focus on are threefold. One is really around improving patient stratification. Like, can you improve the signal to noise to know which patients would better respond versus not? We're doing that in our oncology trials. Which indication should we go into? Where do we expect there to be more causal impact of this target on patients and so forth? So that's number one. Number two, I would say, is just around smarter protocol design and simulating the protocol. Just like we simulate molecules and we simulate biology, what if we can simulate our trials before we run them? There's a lot of work to be done there, but even baby steps around, let me be able to simulate based on the inclusion-exclusion criteria. How many patients might exist? What is the probability of operational success? How can I reduce the number of amendments because I designed something better, which adds to time and cost? And then the third, of course, is recruitment and enrollment. 80% of trials don't recruit on time. Huge challenge. And we're already seeing, we just built out, as you said, is the newest leg of the tripod here. We just deployed that across a couple of our programs, and we're seeing about 30 to 40% increase acceleration in the recruitment of patients. You know why that's important? A, because we start with the patients. We use a lot of the real world data to go to where the patients are, sites, and so forth. But even more so, it allows us to do rapid go, no-go decisions. This is where Recursion is different. We have 5 programs, 2 more in preclinical, multiple shots on goal. We want to make objective, rapid go, no-go decisions. That's also critical.
Well, I think that's actually a fine stopping place for the first half of this show, because we do have to take a break. But please stay tuned, because when we come back, I want to get a little bit more futuristic now about where AI can go in the future to shape R&D. And so we'll be right back.
The BioCentury Show is brought to you by the 26th BioEquity Europe in Prague, Czech Republic. Innovators everywhere are seeing speed as the driver of investment, partnering and success. Speed to the clinic, speed to early human data, speed to de-risk assets. The question for European biotechs is clear. How do you compete in this arena? Facing new momentum from Asia and an unpredictable landscape in the US, the science in Europe is there. There are more experienced operators. And investor sentiment finally is turning. What's needed now is speed. In its 26th edition, BioEquity Europe travels to Central and Eastern Europe for the first time to explore emerging opportunities in the region and debate how European biotech can accelerate to compete and lead in today's world. Join us in Prague, May 4th to 6th for this destination event for investors and biopharma leaders. Register at bioequityeurope.com. BioEquity Europe, where Europe accelerates to compete.
Welcome back to the BioCentury Show's discussion with Recursion CEO and President Najat Khan. As promised, we're going to look a little farther ahead into the future. So when I think about the phases of AI, right, early on, it seemed like it became very good at recognizing features and images, like the cell imaging stuff you were talking about. And then came generative AI, the ability to generate language and images, rather than read images, generate them. But now it seems like the conversation is shifting to agents, right? Systems that can execute more complex tasks, semi-autonomously. What's the promise for agentic AI for drug development?
At Recursion, it's not even a promise. We're already using agents and to orchestrate a lot of the work that happens across our platform. And, in order to really be able to leverage these approaches, it depends how you build the platform, right? The platform is AI native. It was built in a very modular fashion. And that really helps us to actually develop the right agents that can orchestrate different tasks across the board. And the fact that we are able to test and learn fast, I call it the virtuous cycle of learning, that's critical in order to not just, it's one thing to have agents, but you want to have agents that are really good and they learn really fast from your prompts and your feedback. That's what we've been able to do. That's one of the reasons why Recursion has been able to industrialize a lot of what we're doing across biology, chemistry, and we're starting to do that in clinical development as well. So first you start with multiple agents, and then you start with how do you orchestrate across those agents?
Right. Yes.
It's a little community where they need to talk to each other or work with each other. And I often get asked the question, Najat, does that mean the scientists are going to go away? My response is one and the same, which I hope is happening to me as well, which is it's really around supercharging our amazing scientists. Instead of thinking about a lot of the toil that goes with the work that we do. We have done a lot of agentification around our DMTA cycles. A lot of the work that needs to go around, okay, these are the series that the models are generating, that we need to go to vendors, make them, bring it back, and think about all of that work. Is that really what a chemist, a phenomenal scientist should really be thinking about? It's so nice. And honestly, agents work 365 days a year on weekends. So a lot of the work is ongoing. It helps us to be better, faster, smarter. The last thing I'll also say, we measure everything, Selena, everything. And that's a great way of knowing how to be more effective and efficient. It's very data-driven, and we're able to learn super fast. I think that's where a lot of the approaches that you see are going. But then another thing that we haven't talked about is also the focus around the next generation of these models. We talk about prediction and, like you said, but what about, we have a phenomenal group called Frontier, and that Frontier team is really thinking about the bold bets, the risky bets. So some of the work we're doing, for instance, is around, everybody talks about virtual cell. Okay, but why is that important? And just to talk through the audience about it a little bit, wouldn't it be great if we could build foundation models that could predict, different perturbations with, holistically without having to do all of the experimentation? That's the ideal goal. But for me, I'd add another layer to it. I would love the models to be able to do that for what I like to call out of domain areas. So let's say we've made map in certain therapeutic contexts, but we haven't made maps in others. Wouldn't it be great to be able to predict that? Because then you have to do less experimentation, you predict more. That's the kind of work that we're doing because biology is so vast. Can we do everything, even if you have great automation, which we do at Recursion? That's how you expand the scope of what you know. Same thing around chemistry as well. So I think that's where also a lot of these models are going. Fusion models is a really exciting space where we're doing a lot of work, where you're integrating different types of data, genomics, proteomics, phenomics, transcriptomics. So a lot more exciting work to come there as well.
Yeah. Well, I think, in this current moment, what a lot of people can probably relate to is what feels like the dizzying pace of progress. Like it seems like every week we're hearing about another leap forward in AI. And you mentioned this earlier as well. So against a backdrop of what feels like, technology acceleration, how do you at Recursion navigate decisions about, evolving your pipeline in a way that's deliberate and it's not upending it?
Yeah. It's a great question. And I'm just looking at the whiteboard here because we were just brainstorming this morning a little bit. It's exciting to be the CEO of a company that has to stay on top of the dizzying pace of technology and science. Like, that's amazing. It also means I don't get as much sleep as I probably should. But here's how we separate signal from noise. So number one, it starts with our own strategy. We always have a 3-5 year strategy on here's where our platform is today, and here's where we need to go, and all of the things that need to be true to get there. Then we have our early research teams, like the Frontier team, as an example, that's constantly doing research on all of the areas that's not obvious to people today. You have to do that as a biotech, tech bio, however you want to label a company. That is early research. But in addition to that, we're also agnostic to where smart ideas come from. I've always said that, smart ideas can come from beyond the 4 walls of Recursion too. So we have about a third of our company is tech. So we have our data scientists, machine learning, really evaluating how technology is progressing. But what I always look for is not a paper with a benchmark about an old target, which is less relevant than what we do, because we are doing a lot of work in novel and unconquered areas of biology. What we look for is who's actually being incredibly deliberate about their own validation. That's the signal to noise. And I think for that, it requires a couple of things. A, you have to know where you're going, that strategy, and where you want to go. But B, you have to have top scientists and machine learning data scientists in-house who know what good looks like. And I get this question all the time. How do you parse signal to noise? So much of it is having that deep, deep bilingual expertise. Data scientists who are data scientists first, but have a deep understanding and appreciation for science. That can be biology and chemistry as well.
Would you say on the other side of that equation, the tech bio field could use a little more of the biologist injected?
Yeah, we have both.
You have both, yeah.
A third of our team is tech, a third of our team is science, and then the rest is across many different disciplines. And of course, as expanding as we do more work in clinical. But that's the bilingual piece, right? You want scientists that are open-minded, and I underscore that 5 times, open-minded, and also know the limitations and opportunities and how to interpret AI-driven models, right? AI-enabled models. Think about that. Scientists are really good at that with stats. This is just a new area and expertise that's being built. And you have to look at the reverse. AI leaders who really understand and have, if I can say, humility for how hard drug discovery and development is. So I think this is the beauty of Recursion. And I think Recursion has been great about, investing and retaining a lot of talent as we've done acquisitions, right? Just with the latest one from Exscientia, is having that drug hunter mindset, who's incredibly impatient to figure out how to make better drugs using AI, and AI scientists who are humble and incredibly talented to want to make biology and chemistry more programmable, but also appreciate the challenges with making a medicine.
Yeah. So just a bit earlier, you talked about wanting to shift towards predictive models that can work out of their domain. And I wanted to scratch the surface of that a little bit, because when I'm sort of naive about these things. I'm not a data scientist, but I think of these models as ingesting huge amounts of data and mostly doing pattern matching within them. And so like they're good at predicting things that are very adjacent to that data set. When you're going out of domain, like what's the bridge to get you there?
So much of it is what is the diversity and the distribution in the data that you're training the models on. And this is where Recursion, having 40 petabytes of holistic data, right? We don't do just one knockout here and there, whole genome knockouts, overexpression. That scalability really matters. We also have depth in our data set in certain disease areas. Remember, we're in oncology, I&I, neuroscience, and rare diseases. That's a lot of depth. So that, first, the data layer, you want to make sure is as diverse as possible. A lot of the data sets that exist publicly are very skewed in certain different areas, like kinases as an example. So you want to be able, we sit in the sweet spot of both private and public data, proprietary and public data. So that's layer one. Layer two is model architecture. Like we have created transcriptomic models that are incredibly compute efficient, which we haven't talked about compute yet, but computer vision, which is also important, but also the way you train your models to be able to look at edge cases and then to be able to predict like areas that they haven't seen before. That is where these models are going next. But then you might say, how do I believe that's true? Guess what? We have automated wet labs to validate it. This is where the dry wet lab loop is so important, that you don't just infer things. You're able to validate it real time, learn what worked and didn't work, and use that data to retrain your model. That's that closed loop that is very hard to do if you don't have both the wet and dry lab, and you don't have the people to be able to do both. That's how you get, and some of the models that we're using internally, we are able to do that. And then we know, to make it more out of domain, what are the targeted data sets we need to create. I have to tell you, building a platform and a scaffold like that takes a ton of foresight and work. And this is where we're constantly, like I like to say, it's not just, we don't go where the competition is going. We, as one of the leaders in the space, we have to self-disrupt ourselves every day and think outside the box. But that's where I think the true value is going to come from, because a lot of the public data sets and models are just going to get commoditized. Where is the differentiation coming from?
That's right.
Shared.
That is right. I mean, so the term Techbio was very buzzy for a long time, right? But now it seems like these AI tools, machine learning tools, automation to some extent, maybe not as fully end-to-end as Recursion, is kind of being absorbed into more of the mainstream of biopharma. But as that process continues, like one of the questions I had is, how much longer is Techbio going to even remain a distinct category? And then for today's Techbio leaders, is the durable advantage you retain really in those massive data sets? Or how do you think about that evolution?
I think big picture, the durability for any company that's making differentiated medicines is about making differentiated medicines. I could flip the question and say, how long are pharma companies going to be pharma and AI, right? Like I think the entire industry 5 years from now, this is not going to be if you use AI. It's not going to be how you use AI. It's going to be what value you've created using AI. And if you look at other industries, that's not all created the same, right? It's about being able to apply it. Application and integration is much more important than checking the box that I have an AI model, or if I have even good data sets. That's why Recursion has taken what I think some people find complicated, like a sum of the parts complex approach. Like if I can just take a step back for a second. Sometimes people ask me, oh, what's the differentiation and so forth. We have 5 programs in the clinic, 15 in discovery, going after areas that are either first in class or unconquered, right? We know the targets, but they haven't been conquered. And an end-to-end AI platform that we're constantly self-disrupting, being in the bleeding edge of AI models. That is the future of what a pharma company will look like. Now, the question is, who's going to get to it and have durable value? And that always has to be by the end game, about making medicines that matter. I think pharma companies incorporating more AI is great. I mean, that was my role before I joined Recursion. So I couldn't be a bigger proponent for that, because this will move the entire field in the area of using AI. But the metric we should use is not, are you using AI or how much or whatever, but it should be, are we able to close the gap on the 80 to 85% of proteomes that cause diseases, of proteins that cause diseases that we don't have medicines for? Think about the white space that exists, and are we able to do it faster in a more cost-efficient way? And if that is pharma companies, if that is biotechs, tech, whatever it might be, I think that is lifting boats for the entire industry. And that's what we should focus on, irrespective of the labels and what we call ourselves.
So speaking of lifting all boats, I did want to ask you about pre-competitive collaborations, because I noticed you're part of this new AdMet network. Tell us a little bit about why this is needed, what it's trying to accomplish.
Yeah, I've built my whole career around either founding or joining pre-competitive consortiums. For instance, I founded the AI and Structural Biology Consortium, which is focused on PDB is great, but there's a lot of great protein ligand data, both small molecules and antibodies, that sit in the four walls of pharma. And I think just today they added another pharma member to that consortium, which is fantastic. And using federated learning to build a model. So basically, it's actually an academic department that's doing that, while not taking the data, but using federated learning, so the data is protected, but you can leverage and build on the models and so forth. That moves the entire field forward. So the additional consortium that you're mentioning is focused on AdMet. Look, co-folding, protein ligand binding, very important. Step one. Then you have to make sure that the molecules you have are actually drug-like. That means good absorption, good distribution, not toxic. Like, the list goes on. For that too, the data sets are fragmented. So how do we get better data sets together, but use federated learning? Because let's face it, everybody is worried about sharing the data.
Yes.
These are the alternate approaches where, privacy preserving approaches to leverage the benefits of the collected data sets without any privacy concerns. I mean, you're seeing that across many pre-competitive consortiums that's starting. So that's why we joined. And I'll just say last thing, like, there are so many steps. Drug discovery and development is a marathon, not a sprint. That doesn't mean you have to be slow. It means you have to know that there are 100 steps, thousands of steps you need to be better at in order to make a drug. And I think these kind of pre-competitive consortiums that focus on some of the critical inflection points, binding of the protein to the ligand, ensuring that it's actually drug-like, AdMet, and so forth. I hope there are other consortiums around better being able to predict human dose prediction, right? Reducing the reliance on animal testing versus more NAMs and so forth. I think it moves the whole field forward and better.
Yeah, we still do hear folks complain sometimes that it's hard to get people to join in the federated learning systems of some of these projects. Have you found that? And have you found like workarounds that encourage participation?
Yes, having founded pre-competitive consortiums, a lot of it is really education. Education both with the various business units of the various companies, but also lawyers. If I can just say, the number of lawyers that we've had to work with in order to really explain the technical, the privacy preserving, the proof points from other federated learning approaches that have worked well, the technical, anyways, the list goes on, but a lot of it is just the education. Like you mentioned this before, the space is moving at a dizzying pace. And there's two ways to react to that. Either you lean out because it's threatening, it's concerning, or you lean in. But in order to lean in, you really need to understand the trade-offs, the risks, the governance considerations, right? I always say, how do you do the right thing? We all think pre-competitive consortiums are the right thing to do, but you also have to do it the right way, which is where privacy preserving approaches, having real data and talented individuals who are doing it the right way, data governance, data steward is really important. So it's not a simple solution, but I'm a big believer of leaning in to different evolutions, and it just requires us to educate everyone on what are the benefits and how to mitigate the risks.
Well, we do need to wrap up, so I'm just going to ask you one more question. Actually, I'm going to try to sneak two in here at the same time, which is that you've become CEO of Recursion as it moves from platform building, although you're always platform building, but really to clinical proof points. So what does that mean for the way you lead the company, your leadership style, how you make decisions, and then what should we expect from Recursion's proof points in the next year or so?
Yeah, it's a great question. Look, I always like to lead with ambition, clear impact, and clarity and heart for the team. So look, ambition is around what are the things we want to achieve. Impact is really important. And you have to take a lot of different bets and compound your impact over time. The piece around clarity, leading teams that are very different disciplines and they need to talk to each other and building bridges requires clarity on what does good look like, being able to respect each other's different disciplines. This is where I see a lot of things break apart when you're bringing two worlds together. And heart, remind people why we're doing this. A patient doesn't care at the end of the day if the drug was developed using a cool model. The patient cares that it's actually a drug that works and is safe. So that's the heart of every patient that's waiting that we need to keep in mind, front and center, and then have the resilience and fortitude to go through the hard work of making that happen. And that includes tech, science, clinical, and so forth. So, I've come into Recursion, been grateful to be here for a year and a half. But my goals and priorities, threefold for the team. It's the same for the external world and it's the same for the internal world. One strategy, that's clarity. Doubling down on our bets and our proof points, investing really thoughtfully in our platform, and pairing that great ambition with discipline, because there's limited resources and we have to be phenomenally objective and agile with our capital allocation. So what to expect? In the coming year and a half, we have multiple catalysts in our pipeline. We're going to make rapid go, no-go decisions. Each one of them has a bar we need to meet. We also, with our most late-stage program, we have discussions with regulators on potential registrational path and design coming up as well. And with our partners, we have some really exciting milestones on, we're the first AI company that has a joint pipeline with a pharma company. We're really grateful to Sanofi for the partnership. Challenging targets, we're making novel molecules, and we have some late discovery milestones coming up as well. In addition to that, novel maps, generating from that novel data, novel programs with Roche, Genentech, great work with Bayer and more. So it keeps me busy.
Yeah, it certainly does. Well, it's certainly an exciting time for the tech bio field and the industry in general, but specifically for Recursion. So I wish you all the best of luck on your mission there. And thank you for spending a little bit of time with us today.
No, thank you so much for having me, Selena. And thank you to the entire BioCentury crew. I've always said this, you're my Sunday morning with my first cup of tea read. So thank you for all the hard work that you do.
Love it. Thank you.
Brought to you by the 26th BioEquity Europe, scheduled for May 2025 in Prague. Join BioCentury, EBD Group, and regional hosts IOCB Tech and Prague Bio at Biotech's premier CEO and investor conference, and debate what comes next for European biotech.
Kendall Square Orchestra provides the music for the BioCentury Show. The group connects science and technology professionals and other members of the greater Boston community to collaborate, innovate, and inspire through music while supporting causes related to healthcare and education.